G'day everyone, and welcome to another long overdue episode of the AustrAlien Podcast. As always, I'm your host, TJ Hollis, entertainer extraordinaire, and with me is the voice of the people, Mr. Sean Mills. Fella, what is the poop? What's happening, buddy?
What is the poop? Hey, mate, it's been way too long since we've done this. I mean, got our reasons, obviously. Your computer died. That's a pretty flippin' big one. So,
yeah, no computer means no recording.
Yeah. So, mate, besides that, just been busy working my backside off, doing all the different things I do. So, life. But there's a heck of a lot going on in that time, so see how much we can manage to squeeze into one episode, eh?
Absolutely. Well, I've got a few things that I think I've got a few topics that I think were worthy of coverage from this little break. But before we do that, I just want to give a quick shout out to all the people over the last month who've been coming up to me and telling me how much they enjoy the podcast, wondering when the next episode's going to be. Guys, it's really appreciated. So please keep up the good work. The support is absolutely amazing, and I know Sean also really appreciates it as well.
Yeah, damn straight. That's fantastic. I see the messages on Facebook and stuff, and it's good. I'm glad people get something out of it. And always feel free to send us your ideas and send us topics that you want us to talk about, because we'll talk about anything.
Absolutely. So, if you got questions, if you got comments, if you got feedback, just let us know. Hit us up on Twitter. Hit us up on Facebook. You know all the places where to find us. And if you don't, we'll list them all at the end of the episode as well, like we always do.
Absolutely.
Anyway, on to the first topic. This one is nice and new, as in this is literally came out today, the day of recording this one. And I am in mourning, Sean. I am very, very sad man.
Yeah, and I am not.
Yes, I know you are not. But Scott Ludlam has retired, and
lovely choice of word there. Retired.
Well, I think it's a temporary retirement, personally myself. But what he's done at the moment is he has resigned from his Senate position and resigned from being the co-deputy leader of the Australian Greens, effective today. And the reason for this is because he has just found out that he was ineligible to hold elected office in federal parliament in this country because he holds a dual citizenship with Australia and our lovely sister country, New Zealand.
I don't even know where to start with. I just, honestly, I don't understand how somebody can not know that they're a citizen of a country. That's what blows my mind. For 10 years. He's been in there for 10 years. How can he not know that?
Here's an excerpt from his resignation letter that I think that, it's up to you whether you particularly want to think that this is spin or whether you are happy to take him at his word. But he says...
Spin from a politician? Come on.
I know, never. But I do quote here, I was born in Palmerston, North New Zealand, left the country with my family when I was 3 years old and settled in Australia not long before my 9th birthday. I was naturalised when I was in my mid-teens and assumed that was the end of my New Zealand citizenship. End quote.
Well, assumption makes an ass of you and me, doesn't it? It's
absolutely.
Look, I feel in that respect. Yeah, okay. I buy that. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. But it's his responsibility again to have, to double check these things. In fact, he's got a staff that can double check these things. He's got a party. You know what? Even beyond him, the Greens should have vetted that and checked that when he was pre-selected a decade ago. I find it very interesting that it was just some random person of the public that decided to dig into his background and discovered that. So,
well, everything that I've read where he discusses this person, I kind of get a dual feeling that this wasn't somebody who was just, who was just letting him know.
Mm.
I get the feeling this is somebody who was trying to blackmail him.
Okay.
And whether that's the case or not, that is the vibe that I get from everything that he has said when discussing this person.
Okay.
But I think if it's a case of somebody trying to blackmail a politician and the politician just coming out and saying, "Yep, I'm just announcing it right now."
Yeah,
either way, whether that's the case or not, I give him full respect for turning around and saying, this is the case. I found out that I was actually ineligible. I apologise. I'm stepping down right away. And personally, what I hope doesn't happen is I hope that the courts don't turn around and try to take back his last 9 years of pay, parliamentary wage.
That'll be interesting. I mean, look, the Senate has rightly, I suppose, referred it to the High Court, which is, I guess, the Court of Disputed Returns is probably what it sits as for that. But, based on the precedent of, Bob Day for Family First in South Australia, where he had to step down as he was no longer eligible due to bankruptcy or something. They did start to pursue money out of him, but then they also, because he was bankrupt, they didn't end up pursuing it. But, look, I guess it's what they decide to do. If he's made some friends across the aisle in the Senate, he should be all right.
Well, personally, I think the Bob Day situation was different because it wasn't just about his ineligibility, which is why he was forced to resign.
Yeah.
But it was also because he had a conflict of interest where he owned shares in the corporation that owned the building that he had his electorate office in.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So,
which is how you described it to me earlier today.
Yeah.
And I think that is different. That is, that is not just, hey, I was ineligible to serve.
Yeah.
But that is, I was ineligible to serve,
and
plus I did the wrong thing.
Yeah. So,
plus he actively did something wrong.
Yeah, yeah. So,
but you were still correct. Both Bob Day and Scott Ludlam should have known, and more importantly, their parties should have vetted them, which is super important. Now, I'm very disappointed because I think, well, for my money, personally, Scott Ludlam has been the politician that, as a Greens voter, I've been just hoping would take over leadership soon, because I think he is I really hate to say it, of the party that I voted for the last 15 years. I truly believe he is the only member of that party who could pull it together and get the Greens party to get its act together.
Because I would love to losing the way a bit at the moment, aren't they?
The problem is, for the last decade, they've been getting worse and worse.
Well, that's because they've been getting bigger and bigger. It's very easy to be a united front when, Bob Brown's the only person in Parliament.
That is true.
I think the Greens'
problem. The Greens' problem is not that the parliamentarians can't get their act together. It's that the grassroots behind them, the actual organisation, is broken. It is too loose a conglomeration of different people, because you have got your typical lefty hippies there, who are pro-environment, and that's it. Then you've got, under the Greens banner, you've also got the people who really only care about marijuana legalization. You've got people who only care about gay marriage and other progressive issues. And then, even within that, you've got people who are sensible about it, and people who are basically Tumblr. And
human Tumblr.
but then you're also running the gamut where this is all the, slightly anarchistic elements and the socialistic elements and even the communistic elements. All of the people who are just far left for whatever different, unique reason, they all, if they're going to go into politics, they all push themselves under the Green banner because they see it as the lesser of all the evils. And because it's much easier to join an already existing political party than it is to form your own. Not that senators in South Australia have shown that recently. Before we move on to our next topic, I've actually got two questions that I want to ask you, Sean. And I want you to kind of think about it for a minute. The first question, is this the last that we see of Scott Ludlam in politics?
I'm going to say yes, And the reason is Ludlam had actually been on sick leave from the Senate. I don't know if he still was or if it was just at sort of the end of last year.
That was from late November to early January.
Okay, yeah. I think there's some, I don't know the ins and outs of it, and I don't want to, speculate on that, but...
It was sick leave for mental health issues where he was discussing stress and depression and anxiety.
Yeah, okay. I think if he's having those issues, or having, trying to deal with those issues, I don't know if he'll go back in politics, at least in the short term. It might be a good way for him to stay out of it and, move on, find something else to do. I think he'll be involved in the, other side of politics, not actually in Parliament, but, still making a difference for his causes, but, just outside Parliament. That would be my guess with Ludlam.
Fair call. Well, I certainly foresee him after a small break coming back as a lobbyist of some description.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
But I also, I think in 5 years' time we see him running for re-election.
Yeah, possibly. Well, we'll see.
I see him as he will come in at some point. May not be in the Senate, maybe in the House of Representatives. Mm-hmm. But I certainly do see him coming in as the stereotypical third wrestler with the steel chair at some point.
Yeah. Just to fix up the mess that the Greens will become.
Yes, because the Greens are falling apart right now, and they are going to get worse before it gets better. My second question for you, though, is Scott Ludlam voluntarily resigns upon finding this out. Mm-hmm. What is the analogy towards Tony Abbott? And is this something that Tony Abbott should have done earlier in his career?
Yeah. Look, I am not 100% sure whether Tony Abbott has renounced his British citizenship. I honestly think with the party machine of the Liberals behind him, he would have. For Tony, it's slightly different because he was elected in 94, and so there was no need to renounce before 98. Because it was only in 98 that the High Court decision of the case was Sue versus Hill that British citizens were considered foreigners under the Constitution.
Yes.
So before that, a British citizen could sit in the Australian Parliament as long as they were a dual citizen. So they didn't need to renounce anything. I guess in that case, I would assume he renounced around 98. If he didn't, that's an interesting issue. But I would think, 98 is, 9 years ago? Is that...
98 is 19.
19 years ago, sorry. Because I can't count. 98's, it's close to 20 years ago. Surely somebody in the Fourth Estate has gone and looked into this. And it would have blown up before now.
Possibly. On the other hand, though, I think you might be missing one puzzle piece there.
Mm-hmm.
Tony Abbott is a narcissist.
Well,
he is what is called a Type A personality.
A for awesome.
We'll see about that. We'll agree to disagree there, but he holds the same personality as other such people, such as Tucker Max.
Oh yeah, yep.
Which in itself, having a Type A personality is not a bad thing.
No.
The problem is when it combines with being a narcissist and, other of what I would call Tony Abbott's character flaws.
Yep.
Tony Abbott, he comes across as the person who doesn't care. If the law says different to what he believes, it's the law that's wrong, not him. If every other single person in the world believes different to what he believes, it's everyone else that's wrong, not him.
Oh,
and he has shown that He has shown that in the way he has treated subjects in Parliament and the way he has treated people who have disagreed with him, both in his own party and in the general public. So my question is, my thought is, I should say, is that this is Tony Abbott. If he was ineligible, part of me thinks that he's the sort of person who's just going to say, I don't care, do something about it. Until you do something about it, I'm going to stay right where I am.
Yeah. Although, whether you're right or wrong, I just think that over the space of 2 decades, somebody in the media would have picked it up and run with it. Especially considering all the birthist nonsense that went on in the States, it's not exactly an issue. And the fact that everyone knew that Tony Abbott, and knows, he's quite open about the fact that he was born in Britain, which is fine. So, I really just think it would have come up. I'm not a big one into conspiracy theories, so, unless they match my own beliefs, but, yeah, I don't know. I think it would have come up, but who knows? Who knows what goes
Indeed.
on?
But to go on to our first little segue, hitting back on that little joke I made about South Australian senators, there has been, in the past few weeks, just an explosion for the Australian Conservative Party and Mr. Cory Bernardi.
Yeah.
And this is, partly to do with Family First people joining him. Mm-hmm. This is partly to do with Malcolm Turnbull's little grenade that he lobbed into the Liberal Party showroom floor.
Showroom? Party room?
Party room floor. That would be the one.
But it is a bit of a showroom at the moment.
It really is. So, Sean, would you like to?
I can take this one.
Yes.
Look, as you know, I'm very fascinated by the Bernardi experiment, as I'm still thinking of it, because as we've discussed, I think he's got the name right. It's not a personality party. Yes, he's the only sort of person at the front of it at the moment, but it's not really a personality party like, One Nation or Qatar or something. So I think that's been very good. It's very interesting to me, we discussed previously about Family First joining in and how that's going to give him the formations of party structure, but also then the DLP, the Democratic Labour Party, upper house
Democratic Liberal Party,
Labour.
Oh, was it the Democratic Labour Party?
Yeah, the DLP's Democratic Labour Party. It was the sort of the Catholic split of the Labour Party in the 50s.
My apologies. When you were text messaging me about this during my forced sabbatical recently, I just assumed you meant the Democratic Liberal Party.
No. The Democratic Labour Party. They are pretty much the reason. One of the main reasons Bob Menzies stayed in power for most of the 50s and early 60s, because they split the Labour Party between Catholics and everyone else. So, but anyway, they had that person whose name eludes me at the moment join in Victoria. So that's another step. And they're only little things, but they're all building. But then Christopher Pyne, His Royal Highness Christopher Pyne, gets recorded at a centre-left factional meeting of the Liberal Party, saying, basically saying, hey, we've destroyed the right-wingers in the party now. The Liberals are, we're in the top jobs, we've got all the top positions. Basically, we rock, the Conservatives suck, etc., etc. Stupid move in politics, because it's just going to blow up. It's going to, there's already there's that factions that we see played out all the time between the Conservatives and the centrists in the Liberals. That's a real tension at the moment. You'd think, particularly the centralists who are sort of running the show at the moment. Pyne's right, they have one at the moment. They do have all the positions. Shut up and be a little humble, because you still need the other people there, even just for numbers. Otherwise, you're not going to be in government.
you need the support base there.
You need the support base there. You also, that's just members of parliament. Take that out to an election. You're just pissing off all the Conservatives in this country, which I would conservatively say people who are a Conservative voter would be 30% of the population.
Absolutely.
So, you've just basically said, we're not interested in you. And then, the big man himself, Malcolm Turnbull, who I admire quite a lot. I think he's a brilliant businessman. I think he's a decent guy, and I think he's actually one of the people in the Liberal Party at the moment who's actually there for the right reasons. He doesn't need to be there. He doesn't need the money. He's there to advance Australia in, the ways that he sees, but basically, work for the country. I really do believe that with Turnbull. He just throws that grenade in there from Britain last week, while he was over there saying, the party was never a Conservative party, it was always a centralist party. Personally, he's blatantly wrong. Come on, he's blatantly wrong. That's not what Menzies was establishing. He was establishing a centre-right party, not a centre party. And, Turnbull can try to move that into the centre, but it's not. It's a centre-right party. So you need the right and you need the centre to be centre-right. But even putting that aside, even if I'm wrong, which is, probably nigh on impossible, but, even if I'm wrong about that, why? Why would you do that? Why in God's name would you throw that in there to just throw another grenade into an already fractured supporter base and parliamentary room, and the right-wing National Party are in coalition with you? You don't want to be getting them offside to any great degree as well, because then you're out of government. And Bernardi, and, back to Bernardi, how this works for him, he's come out this week, his actual advertising now this week is, the Liberal Party doesn't want you, come and join the Australian Conservatives. And they've just played into that. They have just blatantly played into that. So it boggles my mind that there's people who, all they do is play politics, this particular faction of the Liberal Party. I don't believe they're really interested, cards on the table. I don't think a lot of these people are actually interested in doing anything except in getting their own position right up to the top of the party. And then serving the country and serving their constituents is secondary to that. I don't have words, TJ.
It wasn't just Bernardi jumping on this one as well. It was Pauline Hanson and One Nation Party.
Yeah.
Where Senator Hanson, she's enthusiastically jumped on this, claiming in advertisements now that One Nation is now Australia's largest Conservative party.
Yeah. Okay.
Corey Bernardi says that, he just tweeted thank you to Turnbull's after this comments and just said, this confirmed why, quote unquote, regular Aussies need to join his new party.
Yeah.
But it's,
I don't do much of that war between, they're both targeting, Hanson and Bernardi are both targeting the same people. And Hanson might actually win that in the short term. But One Nation will explode.
I definitely believe in the short term she wins this, but
he's in a long game. I think Bernardi's playing a long game here, and I think he's
Bernardi is absolutely playing a very long game, and it would not surprise me in 30 years if we see the Australian Conservative Party up there fighting as a major force, instead of the coalition.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would not be surprised. Like, if a time traveller came back and told me that, I would believe it.
Fair enough.
If he came back and told me that the Conservative Party implodes within 2 years, I would absolutely believe that as well.
I don't think it'll implode. That's.
I don't think it will, but I'd believe it if a time traveller came back.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I see that. Yeah. It's actually interesting to me, though. The other side of this is obviously Turnbull is scrambling for something because he's losing every poll at the moment. This is a really, really interesting conundrum in Australian politics at the moment, and I think this actually reflects on the voter and the media more than it does on the politicians themselves. What's the polling for the last 10 or 12 news polls has been Labor, 52, 53, 54% over the coalition, right, on two parties.
Yes, and that's got to be stressed that this is a two-party preferred, so you can't choose anyone else.
No, I mean they work that out based on the way the preferences ran at the previous election. So, the One Nation votes might go 40% to the coalition, 60% to Labor, or whatever. So, but anyway, whatever. Anyway, they're in front. Labor's in front by miles. Now, the really interesting thing is if you break it down into the actual issues of the day, people say they want to talk about issues, but this is absolute positive proof that people don't care about the issues, that it is just about the mess at the top of the parties at the moment, and it's all political lines. Because you look at what are Turnbull's big issues? Gonski 2.0, right? 86% of voters support what the government has done over what Labor's done. 86%. More Labor and Green voters into the 90s agree with what they've done, right? Or take the NDIS scheme, where the coalition have said, it's a great scheme, we all agree about that, but Labor, as usual, didn't fund it, so we're going to increase the Medicare levy by 0.5%.
Yep.
54% of people support that. Think about that, though.
Absolutely.
That is 54% of people are supporting a policy that gives themselves a tax hike.
Yeah.
Right? I read this article by Joe Hildebrand on news.com where he sort of talks about a bit of this, and I'm taking some of these figures out of this. He actually has a real great line in this. In normal circumstances, this would make a party room wake up at dawn so they could check the sun shining out of the leader's ass. And he's absolutely right.
That is a brilliant quote. Right. That is amazing.
Well, the levy on big banks, 61% for, 16% against. These are the big three policies that everyone's talking about. They're actually Labor policies from a couple of elections ago and last election. And all Labor are doing are opposing it, and yet they're still in front. People support the policies, they support what the government is doing by catastrophically big numbers, and yet they're behind on polling. And on top of that, of course, Turnbull is miles and streets ahead, and always has been, of Bill Shorten as preferred leader. And yet, Labor is still ahead in the polling. That is just mind-boggling.
I personally like to think of it as Labor is still ahead in the polling despite being weighed down by Bill Shorten.
Yes.
If you put in somebody with any modicum of charisma or ability in that Labor leadership right there, it's swinging to 55, 56%
but they don't
in a two-party preferred.
They're winning with Bill Shorten, and everything Turnbull is doing is right, and people like and agree with and love. But he's still not winning. Here's another quote. The PM's caught in a political death spiral. When he's harsh, he loses the left. If he's not harsh enough, he can't satisfy the right. When he swings back to his moderate roots with gentler policies, the right hate him even more, and then the left simply don't believe him.
Yeah. That's about right. But to be honest, I think that that really comes down to how extremist we've become, not just as a nation, but as a race, as a human race. And you see this as, you see this building more and more in Australia because we've seen it happen over the last decade in America and in Britain, where people are less either able or willing, and I'm really not sure which one it is, to think critically about their own beliefs and listen to people discussing opposing beliefs.
Yeah.
At this point, I firmly believe that one big issue we have in this country is that its citizenry is more than happy to cut its nose off to spite its face.
Well, I think that's proved with those polling numbers.
Absolutely.
There's nothing the coalition is doing that is wrong when it comes to policy. Yeah, they're a mess when it comes to personalities and everything, as we've discussed, but nothing wrong when it comes to policy.
Oh, there are things. There are still things that the coalition is doing wrong when it comes to policy. Well, look, I don't believe that there are. I don't believe that everything that they're doing policy-wise and politically is correct, and I don't believe that everything they're doing major policy-wise is being accepted by the Australian populace as well. You know, especially when it comes to things such as marriage equality, and when it comes to penalty rates. I believe those are two major fails that the coalition government has had in the last few years.
The coalition government has nothing to do with the penalty rates. I hate that. I hate the fact that it's being thrown at the coalition for that. It was a Labor policy to set up this independent commission. All we've done is honoured the commission. It was Bill Shorten himself who set up the commission that reviewed those penalty rates. And now he's jumping up and down like the little flipping bald hypocrite that he is. He bugs me.
Yeah, look, you know, he bugs me as well.
Yeah.
He absolutely bugs me as well. I think
but yeah, that is an issue that's biting the coalition for some reason. So
yes, it is biting the coalition. And I think it's actually a very big part of why their first party preferred polling numbers aren't going, because it's right now it's an open wound.
Yeah.
It's not just an open wound, it's an open wound that's leaking pus, and whether it deserves to be there or not, it's right above the bridge of their brow right now. It's sitting on their face.
That's true. Look, that's a very good point. Whether it deserves to be there or not, it is there. So,
but a big part of it is right now, after the last 7 years of advertisements by the coalition during election years that have basically been all about, look at Labor, they're backstabbing each other the entire time. You couldn't trust them to run anything because they're too busy trying to beat each other up in the car park.
Yep.
They're too busy trying to put knives and bottles in each other's backs.
Oh, the hypocrisy of it's unbelievable. Yeah,
they've managed to do it, and not only do that, but make Labor look like the safe bet.
I know.
They've made Labor look stable.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? It's absolutely amazing, you know.
And well, think about it. How long has Bill Shorten been the leader of the Labor Party?
Yeah, well, has it been a full term and a half?
Not even 2 years. Hasn't been 2 full years. And we're already thinking, oh, geez, they look a hell of a lot more stable than the Liberal Party and the National Party. Yeah. And it's not just because of the whole Turnbull Abbott thing.
Yeah.
It is because we're seeing people such as Cory Bernardi just get up and walk out.
Yeah.
It's because we're seeing big name people like you were saying with Christopher Pyne getting up and saying, look at us, we got rid of all the hard rights, we're winning. 2 years ago, you asked anybody in the street what faction in the Liberal Party is Christopher Pyne in, and you know what they say? They say the hard right.
Yeah.
One thing that I found very interesting was back in April as well, Sean, is where Cory Bernardi was making overtures towards One Nation and Pauline Hanson, to the point where at one point Pauline Hanson had said, and this was in December last year, she said, if Cory wants to take over One Nation, so be it. But at the end of the day, it has got to be on the issues that I want to fight for the people, end quote.
Yeah.
But then turning around in April, when, you know, Cory Bernardi just basically put it out there, said anyone who's right-wing in politics, come on over. A spokesman for Pauline Hanson said that, actually told The Guardian Australia, that Bernardi's invitation, quote, doesn't apply to One Nation because we're not a minor party, end quote.
Well, there's only 2 major parties, and that's just a typical delusion from One Nation, isn't it?
Absolutely. But and speaking of delusions from One Nation, this one I think actually might hit a little bit close to home for you, and I'd be very interested to hear what you've got to say. It's Pauline Hanson has made the suggestion and made the call in Parliament that for children with autism and children with disabilities to be removed from mainstream classrooms, saying that, quote, "These kids have a right to an education by all means, but if there are a number of them, these children should go into a special classroom and be given that special attention." And going on further into her speech, most of the time the teacher spends so much time on them, being the autistic children, that they forget about the children who are straining at the bit and wants to go ahead in leaps and bounds. That child is held back by those others because teachers spend time with them, being the autistic children. She then goes on to say, "It is no good saying that we have to allow these kids to feel good about themselves and that we do not want to upset them and make them feel hurt." End quote. I'm going to be honest, my first thoughts when I read this, I actually spat out my mouth full of water. And I was just like, well, I was very glad I didn't have a computer at the time to spit it onto. But I couldn't believe that she'd say something like this. I couldn't believe it. Just my mind was blown. To borrow a parlance from the American teenage girls of the time, I can't even right now. And which is a sentence I thought I would never say in my life.
And please never say again.
I promise. I promise I will do my best not to. But words fail me. How insensitive and how rude this is. Now, in saying that, I understand. There's a part of me that understands what she's trying to say, because there are two parts to it, two sides to every story, and I understand what she's saying when she says that that the overachieving children shouldn't be held back because teachers are spending more time on underachieving children, and which is a debate that has been held in teaching for the last 30 years. It's just every other time it was underachieving children were children that just didn't understand, not children with disabilities. That's a debate that's raged in teaching for decades now. But this is the first time that a politician has come out and grouped children with disabilities, be them mental disabilities or physical disabilities, together and said, these people need to go. They need to be segregated. And to me, that's a big thing. Like, this is not, it's not, as some pundits have said, an analogous to apartheid. Okay, so you can't be extremist about this. However, I am in no means defending this thought. But I want to know, Sean, to know, as the parent of an autistic child, how do you feel? I know we promised when we started this that we were going to try and keep things dispassionate, but I want to know, how do you feel as the parent of an autistic child when you read these words or hear these words from Senator Hanson?
I guess she's just so blatantly, plainly wrong and ill-informed about the issues that it's to use the expression yet again this episode, it's mind-boggling that people actually vote for. I honestly, I can see what you said, I can see sort of where she's trying to come from here, but it's an ill-informed base that she's starting from. The nicest way to put it is it's an ill-informed base that she's starting from. These kids have a right to education by all means, by all means, which is the but she adds in there. But let's just look at this from the start. What she doesn't know, and she's a senator for Queensland, and I can only speak for Queensland because that's where we are. My son's in prep this year, and he is diagnosed ASD, so autism spectrum disorder, as it's called. The first thing you need to understand is it's a spectrum, and it's a flippin' big spectrum. It goes from what are classified, or used to be classified as high-functioning autistic, through things like, through a whole range of different things, down to, with maybe just sensory issues and stuff like that, to the other end of the spectrum where they are, I don't know if that's a word for it, but they're basically, autistic and they can't speak. Non-verbal is what they call it, yeah, so non-verbal autistic. And, they might not be able to handle sounds or influences from outside and stuff. So first point, big spectrum, can't put them all in one basket. As with everything in life, you can't just say, hey, that's what these people are. Secondly, there is support in schools for children who are diagnosed on the autism spectrum. My son gets funding through the NDIS, so this is federal, which we can spend on different therapies to help him, which is on top of schooling and all of that sort of stuff. This is just, things we can spend on, therapies. We take him to an occupational therapist because his issues are fine motor skills, sensory issues, which means that he is very... he gets overcome very easily by a lot of noise in a place. So, imagine, Oliver can't handle a shopping centre that's packed on Boxing Day sales. It's just too many people and it just completely melts him down. He just can't handle it, as an example. So, the occupational therapist works through different things and, comes out with ideas and solutions and things that we can try and all that sort of stuff to help him along. And that's all been working great. So, that's with his diagnosis, and that's through Autism Queensland. That's all organised through. In the school itself, with a diagnosis, he has access to the special needs unit, which he can go to. Now, he doesn't use it too often, but he does if everything's overwhelming him on a sensory level to the point where he can't function. They'll take him up to the special needs unit, and he'll have one-on-one or two-on-one time in the special needs unit for 45 minutes for a session, maybe, between big lunch and little lunch, that sort of thing. And he'll be there, still do his schoolwork and stuff, but just be able to do that at a lower pace. So there is that help available already in the schools. Those special needs teachers come down to the classroom and help when it's needed in the classroom. In kindergarten, there was funding available he was the only autistic child in his kindy group, so last year he had another teacher who was there for 2 hours a day to help the other two, the teacher and the assistant, to help them out. And, they spread it around. The 3 teachers basically help with the whole group, but, the funding is there for that third teacher because of the autistic child. So she is absolutely categorically wrong to say that, there's no support in the classrooms, because there is support in the classrooms. If there's no support in the classroom, it's because the child hasn't got a diagnosis. So either, and I have seen this in my own experience, the parent refuses to acknowledge that there's an issue, the child won't have a diagnosis, and the teacher still has to teach an autistic child. It's just an autistic child without a diagnosis. That's not the fault of the school system, and it's certainly not the fault of the teacher. It's not the fault of the child or the other kids around it. The fault there lies solely with either the parents for not acknowledging it or the system for not, the health system for not diagnosing it. So, the diagnosis is not an easy process in defence of the health system either. There's so many criteria and you've got to meet so many of those criteria. I'll tell you a story. I'll give you an example with that. When Oliver was first diagnosed, we were a bit concerned. My wife's an early childhood educator and her mother is as well. So they'd actually recognised a couple of the signs early on. And so we took him to, community health and we were just going through the process. And we knew categorically that they did not believe us that this child had these autistic traits because he was great. Every time we went, he was fantastic. And we eventually started talking about, he's a bit fussy with his food and stuff, which is one of the signs of autism. They usually prefer a white food and not dark-coloured foods. I don't understand why, but that's just a thing. And because he was fussy with his foods, they put him into this special food group where there was sort of 6 or 8 kids who were a bit fussy with their food and stuff. When they put him into that group, that was when they suddenly said, yeah, definitely autistic. Because he just couldn't handle... And all the boxes that they couldn't get to tick, they could tick when they saw him interact in that group. He couldn't handle all the noise of all these other kids running around. He was sitting there doing things like, the first week it was really interesting. It was the same process every week. They did the same things, the same exercises. They did the, try this food, touch this food, smell this food, etc., etc., try to taste this food, all that sort of thing. They did that the same every week, and with similar foods each week. because that's the process. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to get him used to it. Oliver loved it the first week. He kind of liked it the second week. By the third week, he wasn't the slightest bit interested. By the fourth week, he just sat there and screamed because he had no concept that, to him, one of the autistic traits is, well, I know this. You don't need to tell me anymore. Let's move on. There's no learning process. He either knows it or he doesn't know it. And they also think that everyone who knows, that everybody knows everything that they know, which is a hard concept to get your head around. But yeah, so, they went through this process, and that was 9 months into the process. It wasn't a short thing. And I know people who've spent 2 and 3 years getting a diagnosis. So just to backtrack there, she's categorically wrong that there is not help available, but the help is only available if the child has a diagnosis. Could there be more help available? Of course there could. Absolutely. There's always, you can always help more. I'd pose a question to her. If there's kids that are being held back, why not put them in a special class? An advanced class. Nobody will complain about that.
That is actually a very good suggestion.
It has the same outcome, mind you. But, why not think of it that way? But her first reaction is to jump on a populist autism thing that, autism's in the media a bit lately, so, let's jump on that and get, the uneducated people of Australia to, get in behind me and vote for me because I agree with them. It's all
I believe
it's total BS.
I believe that it's a big, it's a typical Pauline Hanson move, because traditionally over the course of her career, what she does, and this seems to be her modus operandi, her MO here, is she likes to point at and condemn who she believes are other people. She likes to, whether she likes to do it or not, this is what she does. This is what she has done plenty of times in the past. She likes to play on differences and
divide and conquer.
Push, exactly. Back in the day, back in her first run in Parliament, back in her first political run before she went to jail, she started out by saying, "Look at all the Asians coming in. Stop the Asians coming in." And then she turned and pointed her finger at the Aboriginal people in the country. She said, "Look at all the Aboriginal people. Look at how bad they are." And then in her most recent stint in politics, it's been, "Look at all the Muslim people. Look at all the Arabs. Look at all the people who aren't white who are coming in from other countries. And now look at how different people with mental disabilities are." And she's feeding to a consumer base. And I'm not saying every One Nation voter is of a particular sort. And I also do believe that if what you really do believe is you agree with her on all these things, then, hey, you should be exercising your right and voting the way that you believe. If you believe she is absolutely correct, then you should be voting for her. And you should be voting in agreement with what she says.
Yeah.
That is not my place to tell somebody not to vote that way at all. She is playing to her what she considers her core, but really it's the lowest common denominator of people who don't understand things that are different. And let's face it, that's something psychologically, we've all got to an extent. We all have trouble understanding things that are different because we do not grow up with them. They are not familiar to us. So unless we make a concerted effort to learn and a concerted effort to make things that are different become norm to us, to normalize these people and to normalize these cultures and normalize these things, these elements that we don't understand, of course we're going to be afraid. However, cowardice is not a good excuse for anything. Being afraid is not a good excuse for denying other people rights and for segregation. And to be honest, there's one really big positive of having these children who are autistic, having children with disabilities in the classroom. It's teaching all the other kids. It's giving them educational, learnable moments.
Of course it is.
It's giving these kids a learnable moment every time where they can learn how to put themselves in someone else's shoes, where they can learn how to not hate things that are different.
Let me give you an example of that. We're friends with a couple of the families in Oliver's class at school. And so we were all having dinner during the school holidays just recently. A few of us, we just got together, had a bit of a potluck dinner, that sort of thing. And Oliver was having a massive meltdown over nothing, because it's usually over nothing. And one of the girls who's in his class, you could see a lot of the kids didn't understand what was going on with Oliver. One of the girls who was in his class just went and knows that Oliver loves the iPad and that sort of stuff, just went and found an iPad in the house and got it for Oliver and gave it to him. And, just nicely, just quietly, just gave it to him and, went back to playing with the others and stuff. And it was really nice to see, because that calmed Oliver down and he was grateful. I made him go over and say thank you to her once he'd calmed down enough that he could talk to him. That's an example. That's a prime example.
Exactly.
It's taught her. She understands what some people's needs are not the same as their own needs. I actually had someone say to me not too long ago, well, the thing is, most men are on the autism scale somewhere. And I agree with that. Completely agree with that. Because I see autistic traits in myself, having learned to look at them now. I could point out a couple in you. I could point out a couple in our mutual friends,
Actually, one of our mutual friends, I think about 15 years ago, one of our mutual friends actually turned around and said that perhaps I should go and see a doctor because he believed that I was on the autism scale.
Yeah. So,
which could be very right.
Yeah, as an adult though, you learn to deal with those things.
Exactly.
I don't like real big rooms with big loud noises. I can feel myself physically stressing out about it. So is that a sign of autism? It can be. Maybe it's not. Maybe it is. I don't know. But it does help me appreciate again a bit with Oliver. I know if it's starting to get a bit overwhelming for me, it's probably getting a bit overwhelming for him. So I don't know. Well, I just back to Pauline Hanson. I think you're exactly right. I think she feels it's a populist thing. She hasn't thought about it, and she's just gone and opened her mouth as she does. I think it's exactly what she does with every issue.
I do very much agree there. Anyway, we are coming up to our time, and it has certainly been a very interesting episode. There's been a lot to talk about, and I very much appreciate, Sean, every time that you take the time out to record with me.
Mate, it's awesome. I love it. I love
absolutely,
hearing
as
my own
do I.
voice and my own opinion. And
I'd also like to thank everybody who has taken the time, who's come with us this far to listen to another episode of the AustrAlien Podcast. And please, as always, if you have questions, if you have feedback, if you have comment, if you want to continue the discussion, you can always do that. You can hit us up at the AustrAlien Podcast Facebook page, which is facebook.com/AustrAlien Podcast, spelled alien like the things coming from the sky, maybe, if they're there. Let's face it, they probably are. Or you can hit us up on Twitter at AustrAlien Pod. So it's twitter.com/AustrAlien Pod, or just at AustrAlien Pod on Twitter. And so I just want to thank everyone else again for listening. And please, as we always ask, people always tell me they want to know what they can do to really help support us. And considering we don't have a Patreon or anything like that, what would really help us is to share it. Share the episode with 2 or 3 people. If you like what you heard, share it with 2 or 3 people. If you didn't like what you heard, share it with 2 or 3 people. And also, you can leave us a review on iTunes. That really helps us out a lot. Any reviews that we get, like what our posts on Facebook, all that sort of stuff. typical social media stuff that you've heard everybody rant on about. At this point, you've heard every YouTuber go, hit the like and subscribe button, fam. You've heard every podcaster say, hey, please hit us up. Please hit us up on Twitter, hit us up on Facebook, leave a review. You've heard everyone who uses social media begging for your attention in this way. But there's really ways that you can help us if you feel so inclined. And we really do appreciate it. And anyway, as always, have a fantastic day. We're in a brilliant country. I hope you guys take the time out to enjoy it. Thank you very much.